morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. Of course, we're here for the second day of the Future Minerals Forum. My name is Hadley Gamble. I am the senior international anchor for Al Arabiya, as well as a contributing writer to Semaphore Global. I'm really excited to be sitting here with the gentleman beside me. We're going to be talking about the role of multilateral organizations in turbocharging critical mineral supplies. This is a gentleman who's the Global Director of Energy and Extractives at the World Bank, Dimitrios Papathanassiou. Dimitrios, it's great to have you.
Thank you very much, Hadley. It's really nice being here with you.
One of the big questions that we've been tackling over the last 24 hours or so has been whether or not we're going to see a critical minerals supply crunch. In your mind, where are we today in that process?
So it is interesting to see that we did have a supply crunch for minerals, but that was about 2 years ago. And there's a very interesting graph that I was looking at the other day from Reuters. And if you look at what people call the battery metals, you can see the prices going high up, staying up for about 2 years, and then dropping down to where they were before. And I was thinking that inflation in the critical minerals for batteries has disappeared. And what really happened is that during COVID, when a lot of the processing and the industry in China started slowing down seriously, this is what really pushed all prices up. Now, definitely prices have calmed down, and I think that is an indication of the fact that supply and demand are balancing out. But if we look forward, and I think this is the possibility and the risk of a supply crunch, is that at the end of the day, if we want to stick to the target of bringing the world to a net zero by 2050, then we know for a fact that the multiplication of minerals that needs to come into the markets, the electrification that needs to take place is just massive. So to the extent that we get a sense of urgency on that, that will create a potential rebalancing of supply and demand for minerals. So at the moment, this is not a problem. I think a lot will depend on how fast or how committed the world will be towards the energy transition, and that will give us results on the market as well.
There are a lot of questions about that. In the next few days, of course, the inauguration of U.S. President Donald Trump. This is a president who, in past iteration, talked a lot about energy independence. He wasn't quite so keen, as we all know, on the green side of the energy transition. There are questions about what that will look like. In your mind, how does the world prepare for those eventualities?
So what I think is happening, and it's interesting to see how the world looks around. And from our perspective, what we see that for many countries, it is not the energy transition is not necessarily a climate change issue only. So a lot of the very large economies, and you can include there India, you can look at Indonesia, China without a doubt as well. For them, energy transition and moving towards renewable energy, the wind, the sun, solar, and we see now also an acceleration and interest in nuclear energy. I think a lot of what is driving that is demand for energy security. And this is not talked about so much, but my sense is that this is unlikely to change. And some of the major economies, we do see that in India, we certainly see it in China. They are committed to clean energy, not so much on climate change objectives, but mostly because they feel that they need to create alternatives and energy security for them.
It's fascinating, isn't it? Because as we've often said, those of us who cover energy, energy is the lifeblood. And I think when you look at a place like Saudi Arabia in particular, how they've become a crossroads, not just for oil, but also for other minerals. When you take a step back, the big question, of course, is pricing. It's about the cost. It's about explaining to people that when it comes to an energy transition, things are going to cost potentially a lot more, at least in the short to medium term. And frankly, if you're in a government that is a democracy, like Western Europe, like the United States, that becomes a pretty difficult issue to tackle. Where does the World Bank stand on that?
So from our perspective, our primary objective and our primary mission is about ending extreme poverty, boosting sharing prosperity in a livable planet. This is the mission of the World Bank. And our focus is on helping developing countries develop and grow. And as you correctly said, if you don't have energy, if you don't have modern energy, you don't have modern economy. And there's many countries in the world you can actually see that clearly happening, right? The lack of modern energy is inhibiting growth, is inhibiting development. So our objective is to make sure that we can work and bring modern energy in the countries that need it, and do it in an environmentally sustainable way. Do it in a way that the air remains clean, the water remains clean. So, and there's a lot that needs to be done. We have about 600 million people just in Africa with no access to electricity. We have about 1.2 billion people in the world that are cooking with basic biomass, which is very polluting. It is used indoors. It affects the health of women and children. So for us, our target is how do we get to bring modern energy services, especially to the poorest countries, and how do we help women and children that have to cook with very polluting fuels in-house, how we can help them to transition away from that. So this is our primary focus. And of course, what we also are working on is helping countries to accelerate towards cleaner energy. That is necessary because climate change is happening and we have to find a way to reduce emissions. So that's the other part of everything we try to do.
Are you worried that with the geopolitical shifts, the election of Donald Trump, for example, more right-wing governments in Europe who may have different energy policies, that we're going to see the momentum behind the energy transition de-accelerate?
I think we will see. We will see what happens. And it's hard at the moment to predict what will happen, not just next year, but what will happen in 5 years or in 10 years. But in general, all countries are looking for ways to diversify their energy mix. At the end of the day, no country wants to depend on external flows of energy, because we see and we have seen how flows can be disrupted and have been disrupted. And countries are very uncomfortable about depending on external sources for all their energy. So my sense is that we will continue to see efforts on diversification. It will be multiple sources of energy. For sure, oil and gas for the next few decades inevitably will have a role. There's no doubt about it. The bigger question is, what will this mean for climate as increasingly we're getting evidence? For instance, we were informed recently that 2024 has been the warmest ever for the planet, right? And we have broken through the 1.5 degrees. And the effects that are happening globally are significant. Again, there are uncertainties. We don't know exactly what will happen. We don't know how much this will go up and down. There are clearly uncertainties about that. But the trends are there. And I don't think that anybody seriously disputes trends. It was interesting. I was talking to one of our colleagues here in Saudi Arabia. And we were talking about how nice the weather is now, right? And I asked him, how is it in the summertime? And he was telling me that when he was growing up, people were noticing whenever the thermometer would point to 50 degrees Celsius. And they would say, wow, you know, where is 50 degrees today? And he told me that now this happens quite often. It's not a surprise anymore. Sometimes they hear 54, 55. So this, you know, people can feel it increasingly. So yes, there are uncertainties. For sure, there are politics, unfortunately, surrounding climate change and the issues around climate change. But I think the science is clear. And again, it's not just the climate change as a driver. It is also that energy security matters. And we know that the way to deal with the energy security questions is to diversify as much as possible.
In order to diversify, of course, that requires a lot of capital. That requires money. These things come at a cost. For the World Bank, what is the challenge you see to reaching your goals? And I'm talking about interest rates, environment. What are the things that you're worried about?
So look, there are two situations that are concerning today. First of all, as the world has come out of COVID, and because many governments around the world, both the rich countries, but also the poorer countries, they needed to provide a lot of funding, a lot of credit in their economies to sustain people that were not really producing. What this has created is a stock of debt globally, which is breaking records in many ways. So the ratio of debt to GDP globally has been growing and growing, and this is especially difficult for the poorer countries. So clearly that is a situation which is concerning, and it is hard to deal with. Now, the reality also is that we see that inflation is calming down. And again, this is happening because supply chains are opening up, and a lot of the underlying imbalances that we had are slowly sorting themselves out. So hopefully this will bring a reduction in interest rates, which will make the whole problem of dealing with this huge stock of debt better and will allow for more growth. Now, how quickly this happens, we will see. Clearly, we are at a better place today than where we were 2 years ago. So it's important not to forget that. We have made progress and things are moving in the right direction. But the challenge is enormous. It's a big challenge, and I think that's why it is important as we think about energy and as we think about the challenge of mobilizing financing for the energy transition, to see how we can have flows of capital towards these types of investment, and what does it take to facilitate these flows.
China is your number 2, I think, contributor to the World Bank. We're all looking at the headlines coming out of China today. Just yesterday, there was one in the Financial Times essentially saying that the commodity super cycle is over. And of course, that's reflected in the building and the real estate sector and what's happening there. Are you concerned that you're not going to get the same level of support in your endeavors?
So look, we will see how accurate this prediction is. The logic of the commodity super cycle for China slowly plateauing is that China has built so much now. And if you see what has been driving a significant part of demand for metals and minerals, has been that if you look at the rate of growth of China, say from the late 90s to today, it has been just a breakneck speed year after year after year after year. And not only for the internal growth of the country itself, but because China increasingly was transformed into the world's manufacturing hub. So that is why a lot of metals and minerals were booming in demand in China. Now, we will see. Definitely, they're not going to have the demand of building everything the way they had it for the last 2 years. But having said that, what I think is coming, and we'll see how quickly it arrives, is that just next door to China, you have another huge country, 1.4, fast moving towards 1.5 billion, which is India. And India is approaching now that inflection point in terms of per capita income, where we know, and this happened in China, we see it across the world, there's an inflection point that once you reach that, then demand for everything shoots up. So I think India, and again, the South Asia sub-region is coming up in terms of growing demand. And then demand eventually will start growing significantly also in Africa. I mean, the world still has about 3-4 billion people that have some way to go in terms of the living standards. And always metals, mining, minerals, they underpin that. And what we see now is that with electrifying everything, with the demand for more intelligence on our mobile phones, on everything that we do, demand for electricity will keep on going up and up and up and up. So yes, maybe for China, demand will plateau, but my sense is that demand will grow elsewhere. Now, how quickly that happens, we will see. But inevitably, it's coming.
Yeah. How difficult is it to strategize around the geopolitics, and particularly the prospect of a trade war between the United States and China?
Look, we will see. I mean, the role of the World Bank is we're a multilateral institution. We were created as an entity that is founded in the idea that the world needs to work together. Now, the World Bank was created right after the Second World War as an institution that established how countries can help each other to grow together. But we also went through the Cold War. We also went through crises one after the other. We're a long-term institution. And I think trade wars are definitely preferable to real wars. if you have to think about it. But they will affect everyone's prosperity. And the evidence has been that trade in general brings more prosperity. But we have to find better ways of balancing the inequalities that unfair trade practices can create. And I think this is what has been driving a lot of global concerns, that people have a sense that the trading arrangements for certain parts of the population have not been fair, and they have not been taken care of. So we will see how things develop. The world, if you look at the numbers, the world is really interconnected today. I mean, trade flows are just massive. And we see that even if you have a small disruption, for instance, in access to the Suez Canal, right? Small disruptions there create global dislocations, global thinking. I mean, we are at a phase in the world now that a lot of these issues, and especially coming out of the COVID crisis, the war in Ukraine, I mean, these are significant crises that the world has to deal with. Climate change is building up also as an important catalyst of other crises that we really don't know how bad they're going to be. So our view is that we are multilateral institutions. We believe that the world needs to work together, that the planet is one planet, and we have to find a solution for this one planet for all of us. Yeah. But it also needs to be a fair solution for everyone. So that's the way we think about it. Yes. Again, as I said, we're an institution that historically, we've been through many phases in history, and the world in general has been getting better. Yeah. But we'll see.
And just to the idea that we ignore the global south and its challenges to our peril, the World Bank can't do it alone. You require multi-stakeholder approaches. What are the opportunities in your mind for public-private partnerships, and also finding the right government partners to work with?
Right, and this is the strength of what we bring on the table, which is related a lot with what we're doing here, right? The Future Minerals Forum. And if you look at where the resources of the new future metals are, they tend to be in a lot of the countries where we work, either in Latin America or in Africa, quite a few of them, and in Asia. But nevertheless, for these to be extracted, to have value added on them, and to get them into the trade flows of the world, you need to be able to have agreements that go across borders, and you need to have the kind of capital that is a long-term, affordable capital. And we definitely have it all there. This is why the World Bank was created. We can afford to deploy capital for the long term, and we can create a sense of trust and legitimacy among partners. So the way we're organized is we have the World Bank side, and we provide funding to governments. We have the IFC, who's providing funding to the private sector, and we have MIGA that is there to provide political insurance coverage. So we are well organized to contribute into helping partnerships from government to government, from partnerships from the private sector to government, and to help bring more of these flows to the world. Now, things need to be accelerated. There is no doubt about that. And increasingly, I think this forum that now is in its fourth year, you can see how things have been growing, the interest that it generates, because people realize that this is an issue that we have to deal with. I think there is a consensus everywhere, and I would argue, you know, when I talk to colleagues and people even in China, everybody agrees that we need to have diversification of resources, we need to have more diverse supply chains. And I think we're on the route to that, and we can contribute to it.
How likely is it in your mind that we're going to see this as a geopolitical flashpoint? Who has the resources, who has access to them, and who can afford them?
Look, my sense is that, first of all, resources are well distributed around the world. And the more the world explores for these new metals and minerals, the reality is that we find more of them. We have been doing some work in Africa, and we will issue a report in just a few weeks' time in Africa, in the Africa Mining in Daba, which is another big conference on mining focused on Africa. And the resources are certainly there, but if you look at how much of Africa has been truly explored, actually it's a very small percentage, right? So resources are there. The issue is, how do you establish the trust that is needed to bring in the capital, the investors, so that resources can be extracted, they can be extracted sustainably in a way that benefits local communities, the countries that have the resources, so that they can then enter the global manufacturing system and move the transition the way that needs to be transitioned.
Dimitrios, we have no time left. Dimitrios Papathanassiou, see you. Thank you so much for joining us here at the Future of Minerals Forum. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hadley. Thanks a lot, everyone.